right people in charge who are going to take the fall. You resign, and then you blame it on them later when everything goes wrong. His problem, though, is Caroline Ellison flipped on him.
So she definitely flipped on him.
She was smart. Yeah. She cooperated. Nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. So even though they said, like, we're not going to touch your money, as soon as you deposited Bitcoin, I mean, I talked to some of the insiders at Alameda. They said they had this back door. I mean, he was, really well regarded in Wall Street. So when people invested with him, they knew the returns were insane. But with regulators, they were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed. And CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this battle between them. And ultimately, they've recently been shut down. But the idea was
just the idea of putting your money into Tornado Cash.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is there a better
of that token? Then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. There's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative.
Regulated? If he was doing this, Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC. How you're going to make some money. And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else. He is buying both, lying about it so that you can get all the good press of caring about all these social issues while also not caring at all from the arms of one huckster to another. It's almost to something worse. There are years. Then he comes up, prep school. He's kind of built for success, right? He goes to MIT, goes to Jane Street as this quantitative trader.
And probably overly confident.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, he was saying FTX US was... Yeah, tokens is the individual, you can think of currency, right? So it's the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum. So they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea is this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money. Really perpetuated their fraud. I can break it down. How much do you know about the FTX
Let's
situation?
break it down for people that don't know about it. So
let's do it. So FTX was this crypto exchange that her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this. The problem is when at the exact moment FTX can't pay you back is the exact moment that FTT becomes worthless. So you think you have all this collateral. Never understood how Bernie Madoff got people because it seems so preposterous. And then I fell for something very similar. And what I noticed with all of these things, the thread is everything. I don't have access to the book. I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda. Going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal. And we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there. And all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are this stuff. And you start to have repeat occurrences. I just cover stuff all the time and you see echoes of the same thing. I just had somebody just a couple of days ago I was interviewing for this news scheme we're looking at. And he said, is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. Don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with colloidal silver. I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's maximize productivity, maximize human happiness.
Views about what? You didn't start doing this. You started doing just a normal interview show?
I was just doing a normal interview show with a few of my buddies. And just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars. And so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm I get fed a bunch. He said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's people get away with it. It's just there's too many people doing it. And you'll catch some people. But ultimately, a lot of people will just basically skate by, even though by all rights they should have been. A lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the most fair case you could make about basically screaming about all these scammers online, and unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, it had gotten a guy who enabled God, or who helped cover up God mode, and he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other people, or it's just like,
well, how does he skate on that? How inevitable?
It's inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So that I hadn't really found my footing, but throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with hucksters and fraud, where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. Not actually this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became
What was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it.
Why the celebrities are important. And that's why
huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part. Yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, I'm, middleman, because there's no one who controls Bitcoin. No one can say no to a transaction. Now it's there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then these guys, basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys?
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. The more I study that these basically nerds in cryptography thought of, which is, it's brilliant. I mean, it is brilliant, because it is basically, it's almost impossible to trace.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it
It wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over.
Well, initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone. And
really taken that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that,
hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some third party that got access to our website. Say it was a glitch or something. And so so if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, literally had a $10 billion account that he mislabeled with Alameda Research.
Mislabeled?
Yeah, he's of ads, get-rich-quick schemes. You've got a bunch of people, flexing in their Lamborghinis, telling you, they're 25 years old, telling you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million. And then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX...
each other on amphetamines and making billions of dollars. It sounds like a great story if it wasn't illegitimate.
Yeah, ultimately that's the problem. Sam was just hopped up on investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. You have $1, I'll let you trade with $100, and that's going to be one reason you come to my offshore exchange. I can offer you more leverage than the guys who are
down, because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
Located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your...
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, at the end when you're ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are Sam, you're it's this magic internet money.
Magic.
How do you get some of that? How do you get some of that magic internet money? Well, you have to go somewhere to buy it. And so it's a crypto exchange is where you kind of go, you put your fiat, you believe, it's kind of too good to be true, but the social proof is overwhelming, and it overwhelms your kind of like alarm bells. So the social proof is a combination of things. So first of all, it's like LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through who's, now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank of was going on, now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big like kind of scam, he called it fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislabeled.
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to. He's doing interviews with that crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But a lot of person in the space to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems.
But
it means playing League of Legends while on investment calls. Like at the time, that was seen as this charming, genius thing.
On calls.
You could hear even actually the account fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscured 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that like there's nothing here. But the problem is that and so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about like how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what FTX, some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews.
It is the experience of the lawyer that FTX then hires is like being complicit on a leaked private call, trying to cover up this God mode scam. Appreciate your transparency. Kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. He's sort of the next Warren Buffett. That when everything goes wrong, and she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery company, so they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage. They kind of shut down. Myself and some other people were saying, like, we think they're insolvent because we had taken a look at their numbers and we said, there's no way they have the money for this. They don't have the token. The handle now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep you withdraw. There's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. It's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem,
and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on them. It was amazing that he felt like he could do
shocking thing. And I think that shows, like, if you're running a shady empire, like, who's better than a shady lawyer to try to help you cover it up, right?
How did you get in?
All these other guys buy into him.
Right.
And then they themselves are kind of also looking at each other, being like, well, that guy did it. Like, what? It's the hottest deal. Sam goes, oh, you won, like, our battle. And people were like, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers? Pilfering FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money, and he lost it.
And so this is all because it's on
money and go start trading with it, unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. Yeah, Elizabeth Warren wrote a letter to them. They're being looked at much more closely. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are so opaque in the sense that
you do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. Put like let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. A bunch of people are putting one Ethereum into. You do not get to that level and not know that things were wrong.
Well, reading her tweets about amphetamine use was pretty wild too. The whole scene was
money. Like, well, how can you view this as a battle? Like, but he viewed it as like we're sparring partners. Like, and you won this round or you won the war.
Because he thinks this is going to go on forever.
Very strange. And these offshore entities were also using like U.S. branches. Like there's FTX US, which was like more regulated, but not really that regulated. You can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on chain all our FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
But like, it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? Nobody's back that bill. And now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it. Your issue is that anytime there's demand for withdrawals, you're going to encounter problems. So it was going to be inevitable anytime any store setting it up with like, I used to be broke like you. Well, that's a strategy. A lot of these guys were never broke, right? It's just part of the story you have to tell to be really effective. It's like, fine. And then FTX US went bankrupt, and he's the one who put it into bankruptcy. And then he's telling everyone, oh, no, the money's actually still there. I mean, he was constantly giving a conflicting narrative.
Bizarre that so many people got duped. And I felt the same way about Bernie Madoff. I'm not a financially aware person. I'm not into the market. I don't follow these things.
Lateral like dollars or like some asset will give you FTT tokens, which is their own invented coin. And that should have value if anything goes wrong. And people were accepting that as value, but what that was to hide it from people who were trying to take a look at his books. But it's just, that's what I mean by black box. You never know what games these guys are playing. Like they say, oh, here's sort of like the rough estimate of our balance. I'm a millionaire by the time I'm 23 years old. Just buy my course. My course is, $2,000. Pay me $2,000. I'll teach you to get rich quick. So most of this 10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, information about that. He says, hey, we're actually do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese. We don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. Like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went
stuff? You're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? Or with just put a bunch of garlic cloves in the pot. I still remember our house like reeked. She would put 60 cloves of garlic in a stew something. Because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens?
It's a crypto exchange, right? So how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto, the money system has to be safe. Like your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to, if you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China, like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here, maybe that's a big deal. He lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got a dollar out of it. But that was what the deal was for.
I watched the CEO, the new CEO, talk about it.
Yeah,
about him trying.
That's John Ray.
Yeah, trying to unravel it, and it's amazing.
Where he broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be. There would have been a run on the banks, and people would have found out. It's just like, when are they going to find out? It just he happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have. Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16, or something like Europe or something like that, is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah,
it wasn't a scam. I've said this before because I root for nerds to like be that successful that you just completely living outside the norms of society, just fucking
assets. You can check yourself. Like, I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great, but it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, if I owe $2 billion.
Right.
So by the third interview, I'd studied him, and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to, it was the terms of, this is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you... Actually, campaign finance laws, I've heard, are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate. You know, there were things that were coming out, like questions about, you know, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. You can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this like fancy language for a way to like anonymize your transaction. Like you put it, reputable people like BlackRock, Sequoia Capital, they all invest in this guy. Kevin O'Leary famously promoted it for like $18 million.
They gave him $18 million to promote it?
He says, so we were warning people, hey, this is probably insolvent, get your money out. But CZ ultimately was the big, like, he was the most notorious and, like, well-respected, or the CEO as of 2020. He hands it to this, a girl he actually had a relationship with, Caroline Ellison, right? And she supposedly controlled it. He said she did everything. That's right, but...
Also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So
yeah.
Sam knew publicly, in our current American climate, like, knew all the crypto people were trying to control regulations to favor their individual business situation. And so CZ felt like he was being cut out in Washington, but I'm from the Bahamas and I'm American, so that might be fine. I mean, everyone's always interested in the regulations benefiting them. The challenge now, though, is, you know, a lot of people somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyers, like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, hey, crypto is... Sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So, like, look at the Turkish lira. Abilities, you know, it's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's...
Found out how to be successful. And if you invest with me, I'll save you time. You know, you could do it yourself, Joe. You could do it. But what? It's going to take you 5 years. Get with me, and I'm going to shortcut your...
Involved in what you do.
It's a weird thing.
So when did you start your YouTube channel?
So I started it a few years ago, 2018, 2019, because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want to expose, but like, I'm interested in the characters who perpetuate fraud because they're such interesting psychological case studies. Sam Bankman-Fried, you could probably write a whole book about that. They're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks. Every time the government's printing a bunch of money, where do I go? Right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like, you win. The son of Harvard lawyers, we just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was and then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not. Maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. He launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm. Which basically the idea here is, we have some ideas. We're going to raise a little bit of money, and we're going to do gay. So, like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it, like.
No, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Like, there was a lot of fear of missing out, or FOMO, in the markets at the time. You know, everyone thought, oh, cryptos, you have to get in now, right? Because if you get in now, I hate doctors so much, and it always seems to like end up with a sales pitch. Like, it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was like always like there's a catch. Mm-hmm. So I didn't, fight. Like, one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that because Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere, and then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
and that's ultimately what he was doing, but it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like, but even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit, like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no, now I can just send you $100K, it's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they'd like to get paid. One guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices, and then after he made his money that way, we're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically they call them straw donors, because it's like, if I give money to you to store your money somewhere else, how do you store it? So there's this idea of like these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that like, hey, if you're someone like me, your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just like, he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm like this, like, I care about all these issues. Yeah. But it's like even more cynical than just buying one party.
It was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
$10 million, or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police, and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? He blamed all the wrongdoing of FTX on Alameda Research. And he said, I don't control Alameda Research. Even though he was the owner, he's no longer...
Analogy for losing your house?
You know what's funny? Yeah.
I mean, good Lord.
The idea of these mixers was you'd anonymize your transactions. So, like, let's say there was already all this worry in the past. That summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed, and people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could maybe not have the money. He's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the two of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was, it's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed, and he, caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why he started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this money to a politician on my behalf. You're a straw donor. You're not really a donor. So Alameda was using customer funds to pay off politicians in order to try to get favorable. He's like, well, think of it like a box. And, you tell a bunch of investors, hey, if you put money in this box, we can get some money out. I, too, am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put money
is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
And it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to even before that I had done a show where I was like trying to break down these topics. I was like, touch your money, obviously. That was the whole point. It's like, you deposit with us, we're not going to do anything with your money. It's your money. It's like a deposit. It's almost like a bank. Like you deposit with a bank, your bank isn't supposed to go ahead and take your money. So this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. I started hearing about these tokens, and they're like, hey, selling courses, like, it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like, they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is not. I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was like, I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of, of a bottom line for ExxonMobil or any, not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. They're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. What I know is everyone's always interested in pulling up the ladder after them and like building the kind of the rule book around like, hey, like if you're from this certain jurisdiction that we're a part of, you're fine. If you're not, like EX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had a look at their books. Like it was very opaque. There were some margin trading accounts. And I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And all they wanted.
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
was wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down, and instead of taking maybe a day or something, it'll take like. And that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cahotis, he's a famous short seller. He was find out like there were just no adults in that room, and like the few adults that there were like, they had like a criminal lawyer. Anyway, I don't think he's actually been convicted of anything. I shouldn't say that. They had this guy Dan Freemars, and I'd go because it was like my friends like said, hey, we have to get somebody. You want to go? And I was like, sure, I'll go. I was like kind of fascinated, and you'd see these guys or system to where they could see you, Joe,